This episode covers July 17th through July 22nd, 2024. My meanderings over these 6 days took me 1,018 miles, from Pocatello, Idaho, down to Salt Lake City, across the mountains of Utah, and into the wide plains and canyons of Wyoming. I dipped back into Montana, and finally into South Dakota. I got my bike serviced, spent a few days hiking back in Moab, fought some serious winds and rain, crossed the Bighorn National Forest, and visited the Little Bighorn battlefield where Custer had his last stand. Let's get going. Welcome, or welcome back, to days 98 through 103 of My Grand Detour, my 112-day, 18,000-mile solo motorcycle journey across the United States, and a little bit of Canada. I've been making these videos to share the wonder of the ride, the places I saw, the people I met. If you enjoy this kind of travel storytelling, hit like and subscribe. It really helps keep me going and keeps this community growing. Day 98, to Salt Lake City for service. If you've been following my videos, you'll know that I've been riding with a suspected oil leak since I had my bike serviced back in Kansas City on April 30th. Several dealers along the way had looked for it, but no one found it. In my last video in Yellowstone, the oil light finally came on, and I had to go on a bit of a quest to find some compatible oil. That's why I've detoured down here to Salt Lake City. Not only is it time for my 18,000-mile service, but hopefully they can find and fix the leak once and for all. The 18,000-mile service is pretty involved, so they're going to keep the bike for a few days. While they're working on it, Scott and I are meeting up with his friend Tom, and the three of us are heading down to Moab for a few days of exploring. Days 99 to 101, back in Moab. Scott, Tom, and I spent a few days in Moab, visiting Arches and Canyonlands National Park, and Dead Horse Point State Park. We did some hiking and took in some incredible views. And we took an incredible Jeep drive down the Schaefer Trail from the rim of Canyonlands back into Moab. It is not a road for the faint of heart, but it was unforgettable. If you have a four-wheel drive and no fear of heights, you should go for it. I give Scott a lot of credit for driving it. For more on Moab and the amazing parks there, I'll put a link to my previous video when I came through the first time, a few months ago. Day 101. Back on the road. When I picked up the bike a few days later, I was thrilled and relieved. They had found the source of the leak quickly. It was the water pump, which they replaced under warranty. They also completed the full 18,000-mile service. New plugs, checked the valve clearance, flushed the brakes, the works. Everything was running perfectly again. The service team at BMW Motorcycles of Salt Lake City was outstanding, and I was incredibly grateful to have everything back in top shape. I also bought a small bottle of oil to take with me, just in case. That bottle has now become a permanent part of my emergency kit. So now it was time to get back in the saddle, say goodbye to Scott, and point the bike east, towards Utah's mountains, the plains of Wyoming, and the long road to the Bighorns and the Badlands. I left Salt Lake City on a bright Saturday morning, cutting across Park City and then northeast towards Riverton, Wyoming. It was mostly highway miles. I-80 stretch, a good way to get reacquainted with the road. And everything was going smoothly until I reached Lander. That's where my GPS lit up, with severe weather alerts. I kept rolling, hoping the storm would stay north. And it didn't. And after a while, I was stuck in the middle of a wall of wind. 40, maybe 50 miles an hour, slamming the bike from the side. At one point, the road curved left, but the wind kept pushing me straight, and I had to lean hard just to stay in my lane. When I finally found a straight stretch, I pulled over for a bit, and I pointed the bike into the wind and waited it out. The rain wasn't terrible, and my gear kept me dry, but keeping the bike upright was a full-body workout. About 30 minutes later, the gusts eased, and I crept the final 5 miles to my hotel in Riverton. That was one of the toughest half hours of weather I'd faced on the trip. Dinner and a hot shower, and sleep came easily that night. Day 102. Crossing the Bighorns. The next morning, I set out for a shorter day. Riverton to Sheridan, Wyoming, crossing the Bighorn National Forest along Highway 14. The first stretch through Wind River Canyon was gorgeous. Cliffs rising above the river, the road twisting beside it. The landscape turned greener as the Bighorns appeared on the horizon. Whenever I approach a mountain pass, I catch myself tracing the ridges with my eyes, trying to guess where the road will climb and curve. I couldn't figure it out on this one. Once inside the forest, the temperature quickly dropped. The trees closed in, and the road got steep and twisty. Somewhere near the top, I noticed a sign that said, "Watch for falling rocks." And a few miles later, another sign said, "Watch for fallen rocks." And I wondered, don't fallen rocks have to be falling rocks first? Is there an actual difference? Or is it just a preference? I noticed that some states even avoid the whole problem by just saying, "Watch for rocks." I think that's the best solution. I stopped at Shell Falls for a quick photo, Climbing higher, the cliffs gave way to rolling alpine meadows at over 9,000 feet. And then came the descent. Sweeping turns, big views, and that familiar mix of focus and joy that makes mountain riding so special. Day 103, Custer's Last Stand. The next morning, I left Sheridan early and headed north, back into Montana to visit Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument. It's one of those places you think you know until you actually stand there. A park ranger was giving a talk as I arrived, and his storytelling was powerful. Not just about Custer's defeat, but the broader history that led up to it and that followed. It was a sobering reminder of how complex and tragic our country's past really is. Walking the ridges where the soldiers fell, each marked by a small white stone, felt heavy. Oddly, most of them lie together now in a mass grave beneath the monument. And the adjacent Custer National Cemetery holds thousands more. A quiet, solemn field stretching to the horizon. From there, I rode south and east toward South Dakota. The heat was relentless and the landscape wide and bare. But by late afternoon, I rolled into Spearfish. Tired, dusty, and ready for what lay ahead. From the relief of having the oil leak fixed, to wrestling the winds across the plains, to cresting the bighorns and standing on historic ground, these 6 days reminded me that this trip is not just about endurance, it's also about discovery. Tomorrow, I'll head into the Black Hills, to Spearfish Canyon, to Devil's Tower, and the legendary roads around Custer and Mount Rushmore. The rides I've been hearing about for years are now just a few days away. Thanks for watching. Until the next ride, be safe, be curious, and keep meandering.